How's it going? My name's Dan Palmer. Before I get into this deck, just a little bit of an introduction to who I am. I'm just a average standard F&M grinder. I live in Australia. I'm nothing special. Obviously, there's not much of a pro scene in Magic in Australia, but you know, for what little of it there is, I'm not really a part of it. I like to think I'm just like, your average F&M player. I build standard decks. I like to be competitive. I like to win, but I'm not a full-on spike in that. I do like to have a degree of entertainment in playing Magic that isn't wholly derived just from winning. I like to play decks that I actually enjoy, um, because look, that's what you play Magic for. But look, that being said, a large part of me enjoying the game is winning games. So I'm not going to play complete jank. Uh, and it's kind of ironic I say that while presenting you this deck right now. But I guess with this series, I just want to present to you guys, what decks I'm brewing throughout the week, that I plan to take to F&M. And I want to play a few games with them, go through a deck tech with the list. Look, these decks might not win Pro Tours, but it's like a cool insight, I guess, into your average day player's journey throughout the week in Magic. And personally, I really just need to play a lot more Magic, so this is a good excuse to do so. If you're wondering, I'm using a program called Xmage. It's a open source version of Magic Online. I think it's a really useful tool for testing decks out before you want to invest money in them. So that's what I'm doing right now. That's enough introductions. Let's take a look at this deck. So when I was brewing this deck, or before I came up with this deck, there were two decks in particular that were really going through my mind a lot. Couldn't stop thinking about them. The first of those two decks was Saito's Mono Black Aggro deck that he used at the Pro Tour recently. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't the Pro Tour. It was I can't remember if it was a GP or a SCG Open, but he used it recently at a big tournament. Actually went very well with it, and it was an interesting list. It had so many one drops, all of the one drops, and most interestingly, I suppose, it had at the top of its curve Obelisk of Erd to help fight through Drown of Sorrow and to sort of provide you with a late game, well, not late game, but a finisher after you've dumped all of these one drops onto the field. And I guess thereby it had a sort of sub theme of a human deck. And I thought it was a really cool deck. Like, I really enjoyed all of the one drops. I tested it a lot, had some fun with it, but really in the end, I just didn't feel like it was as good a deck as I felt it could be in Mono Black Aggro. Of course, Saito went really well with it, so who knows what I'm talking about, but I don't know, I just felt like Obelisk of Erd was a bit counterintuitive in that you tap out your whole board, and usually your mana for a whole turn for something that doesn't really impact the board immediately, which felt like a weird thing to do in an aggro deck, especially when you're in this meta full of decks that, start blowing things up and going crazy after turn 4 or 5. If you're versing Abzan control, Sultai control, blue-black control, Abzan mid-range, all of these decks, they play things like Crux of Fate or End Hostilities, where if you're giving up a turn essentially to drop an Obelisk of Erd, you're just opening yourself up to just, End Hostilities, Crux of Fate. That's a nice 6 mana artifact you have there. Too bad it's not doing much, It just felt a little counterintuitive. And look, obviously it worked very well on the day, but I wasn't convinced with the deck. So that was the first deck that has been going through my mind. The second deck, perhaps a little less obvious from looking at this list, was actually Patrick Chapin's modern deck that he played at Pro Tour Fate Reforged, and he actually went terribly with it. But he was a big fan of the deck. He said that he didn't prepare enough, and he thinks it has a lot of potential. And personally, I thought it was a really awesome deck. What it did was it played 4 Gurmag Agla, 4 Tasigur, I believe. Maybe it was like a 4-3 split. And then all of the cantrips, Gitaxian Probes, Serum Visions. He even played Mishra's Bauble. And obviously, fetch lands assist you in getting a fairly regular turn 2 Tasiga or turn 2 Gurmag Angler. And that got me so excited. And as a standard player, I was trying to think about how you could play this deck in standard. Obviously, you don't have... We don't even have any 1 CMC cantrips in standard, which is annoying. So it would make... Immediately, the deck is almost impossible to build in the same style. So, you know, I tried playing around with, like, blue-black... Tigan Schemings, which is a terrible card, Torrent Elemental, which is a decent card for a bit of synergy, but really the modern deck relies on explosiveness. It's not looking to play any sort of long game where a card like Torrent Elemental will come into play, and I was trying to replicate the modern deck, so that didn't work out. I tried green-black with Seder Wayfinder, Commune with the Gods, and yeah, you can get a fairly regular turn 3 Tasiga or turn 3 Gurmag Angler, but there's no, you're effectively giving up your second turn to get to this point, and all of it is wiped away with a single hero's downfall, for example, or a chain to the rocks. So you're investing so many turns and so many cards into this powerful play, but it's not as, like, there's a difference between a turn 3 Tasiga and a turn 2 Tasiga, which is what Chapin was going for, and I just felt it was too linear a plan that was vulnerable, and I didn't. Obviously, it wouldn't work for me. So I put all attempts at replicating Chapin's deck in standard aside until earlier this week, when it occurred to me that a bit of Por qué no los dos with Saito and Chapin, instead of playing, Obelisk of Erd as your sort of big spell in the Mono Black Aggro deck, why not play a card like Tasiga the Golden Fang or Gurmag Angler? Because while we're not playing 1 converted minor cost cantrips, we're just dumping all of these 1-drop creatures or Thought Seizers out, which fairly quickly fill your graveyard. Like, you force your opponent to deal with it, because if they don't deal with it, then you can just kill them with the Mono Black Aggro strategy. You just bash them to death fairly quickly. But if they do deal with it, then they're just fueling you to play really cost-efficient fatties like Tasiga and Gurmag Angler to recover in this really dynamic way. And let me just tell you, you haven't lived until on turn 4, you drop a Tasiga to Golden Fang for 1 black and then a Mogus Marauder, give them both Intimidate and Haste and kill them. Like, that was one of my favorite plays with this deck in testing, and it just has some really awesome plays. And as you can see from this list, like, I'm loaded up on 1-drops. I've got 4 Blood-Soaked Champion, which is great. I'm running 4 Thoughtseize and 2 Despise, so 6 1 converted minor cost discard spells. And let me tell you, these have proven probably one of the best cards in the deck. Saito didn't run any Thoughtseizers, and he's 60. He had them in the board. I've really just won so many games off the back of Thoughtseize, Despise, make your hand terrible, and then just kill you. I've won so many games with that, it's unbelievable. And we've got 4 Nailed Scarhide, which is another... Oops, I just deleted one from my deck. 4 Nailed Scarhide, which is another 2-1 for 1. Let me just add another back while I'm talking. And I really like Nailed Scarhide because it has Bestow. So later in the game, after you drop a Tasiga, you can then bestow Nailed Scarhide onto the Tasiga and make it a 6/6, which has also won me a couple of games. And Saito didn't run this card because he was going for the human sub-theme, but I'm not really going for that, so I'm very happy to chuck this guy in there. As I said, Thoughtseize, Despise, and then 4 Tormented Hero, which is another 2-1 for 1. I really like this card because of its heroic ability, which, because of Grave Strength, which I'm running, actually you know, pays off a few times. It's actually got me maybe like 1 or 2 damage over a game, which isn't much, but you know, it can be the difference in this sort of deck. So good old Tormented Hero, gotta love him. Um, onto my spells, my 2 converted mana cost spells, running 4 Bile Blight. Like, it's just so good in this current standard. You really need a way to answer Hordling Outburst, and Bile Blight does a brilliant job at that, but really it hits everything you want to hit. You know, you want to hit their early game creatures. You don't care about if they're dropping Tassigers and Siege Rhinos, you're in trouble. It's tough to beat that. You can beat that. You can beat a Siege Rhino by just swinging past him. Ideally, you want to Thought Seize or Despise him away before they can play it. But look, you're not. Those aren't the creatures you really want to answer. And you have 2 heroes downfall here to answer them if need be. But Bile Blight just clears the way for your early attacks because you want these 2/1s getting through for damage. And especially if you've Grave Strength them. Now Grave Strength, I will admit, is probably the weakest card in this deck at the moment, but it can also result in the nuttiest plays. Now, of course, you open yourself up for a 2-for-1 with Grave Strength because if you choose a target creature and then they destroy the target creature, well, your spell has done nothing. You've been 2-for-1. It's a disaster. You should call your mum and have a sob, but it's not hard to play around that. If they tap out, because if you drop a turn 1. Say you're on the, even if you're like on the play, you drop a turn 1 Nod Sky High. It goes to their turn 2. They drop a Seder Wayfinder, for example. Then okay, coast is clear. They're tapped out. Grave Strength. At the very least, the good thing about Grave Strength in this deck is that at the very least, it fuels Tassiger and Gurmag Angler. So it very rarely doesn't do anything. If you were just playing straight Mono Black Aggro, I wouldn't recommend it because the 2-for-1s, as I'm saying, but because it puts 4 cards in the graveyard effectively, the 3 cards from its mill ability and then itself, it just works so well with Tassica and Angler that it's definitely worth a spot in this deck. And sometimes late in the game, Grave Strength is insane. I've won a game just earlier today actually with a 13-12 Tormented Hero because I Grave Strengthed it on like turn 8 or something, and I had like 10 creatures, 11 creatures in the graveyard, and out of nowhere, he thought he was just staring down at 2-1, and then I hit him for 13 and won the game. So it definitely has its times where it's just so explosive that it's worth putting in here. So I mentioned Heroes Downfall, like you want this as a hedge against Planeswalkers, but also just big creatures that you just can't get through. So it's a little slow in this deck. I side it out a lot because of its slowness. Like 3 mana is a lot in this deck. If you want to be dropping 3 mana, you either want like a big Tassiga / Gurmag Angler, or the next card, Mogus's Marauder, because these cards can just win you the game. Mogus's Marauder can it's a really explosive card. Out of nowhere, you can be doing a bunch of damage that they never saw coming. Put them on a really short clock, or just finish the game. It's another card I'm a little skeptical about because it's slow. Like when you see it in your opening hand, sometimes you just wish it was another 1-drop. But it's done just such a good job for me in general that I can't really complain about it. And of course, Tassiga, Gurmag Angler, really big guys for not much cost when you actually play them. I can't use Tassiga's ability, but I've maxed on him instead of Gurmag Angler because that extra 1 mana is generally a lot more relevant than the extra 1 power. But you know, that might even change. But for now, I'm happy with this configuration. And then quickly to the sideboard. Oh, so for the lands quickly, I'm running 18 swamps, 4 deltas. Saito ran 8 fetch lands. I'm just a little worried. Like when you have red-white aggro running around, I don't know if you want to be losing all of that life. Like even sometimes when I like verse aggressive decks like Mono Red or Red White Aggro, I'm already a little nervous about just cracking deltas, but they're good because they fuel delve and they thin your deck. So I'm very happy with 4 deltas. Maybe 6 fetch lands is a thing I can explore. We'll see later through the development of this deck. Now the sideboard is a little sketchy. I'm definitely still figuring this out. But let's have a look. So I've got 2 more Despise in there. Because I found that some decks just get absolutely wrecked by Thoughtseize and Despise. Like some decks you just go Thoughtseize, Despise, Thoughtseize, or Thoughtseize, Despise, Despise, or any combination of 3 1-mana discard spells, and they just don't have a hand anymore, and then you just drop Tasigur and win the game. Like that's happened many times. So maybe 4 Despises in the 75 is greedy. I've considered like Brain Maggot instead, just to like vary my threats a bit. But look, for now, I'm happy with those 2 extra Despises. Like I verse Sultai Control. When you verse Sultai Control, having 4 Despise and 4 Thoughtseize is just I can't explain to you how amazing that is. That is mint as, because all their win conditions are Planeswalkers, so you take those, and then Thoughtseizing away their removal. My other deck is Sultai Control, so I don't know, for some reason I feel this like deep happiness from destroying a deck that I love to. Maybe I should see a psychiatrist, I'm not sure, but that's what the extra Despises are there for. Ruthless Ripper is an interesting one. The good thing about them is that like against mid-range decks like Abzan, they always trade up. They trade up very well. They trade for an Anafenza or a Siege Rhino, even just like a Corsair. So I feel like in decks like Abzan mid-range, they're just like better than Tormented Hero, because Tormented Hero doesn't match up very well against Fleece Mane, against Corsair, obviously against Siege Rhino. Neither do Nard-Scarhide or Bloodsoak, but at least Bloodsoak can come back and Nard-Scarhide can bestow. So I feel like Ruthless Ripper is a good way to just have this 1-drop. You can get in there for a bit of early damage, but then trade up as well. Farika's Cure, great against Red-White or Mono-Red. Just a good spell, really. I like it. Sign in Blood is coming in against grindy matches, particularly control matchups, because you don't really care about the losing life bit against control, and you want to have a 2-for-1. It could be a Read the Bones, but I feel like the extra 1 mana is a lot more relevant than the Scry 2. So I've gone with Sign in Blood here. Fairly happy with that choice. Herald of Torments as a 2-of. This is mainly against decks where Mogus Marauder is just not good. Like if you verse a black deck and his Intimidate doesn't do anything, Mogus Marauder can often just be a really weak card in your deck. So if you can get rid of them and chuck in a few Herald of Torments, like against Abzan, I really like Herald of Torments because it breaks through the sort of clogged ground. They have all these courses, Fleece Mane lines. Herald of Torment just flies over them, and obviously you can bestow it on a Tasigur and love life. The third hero's Downfall, like I'm not sure about this spot. Like I just kind of chucked it in there for if you're versing like a Planeswalker heavy deck or Abzan where they have a lot of creatures, like big creatures that you just need out of the way. As I said, this sideboard's a little touch and go. And Murderous Cut, I feel like similar sort of thing against like Abzan mid-rangey decks. In my head, I was like, oh, sideboard out like 2 Tasigur for 2 Murderous Cut. I really don't know how good a strategy that is. Definitely one of the things I have to work on with this deck. But there you go. Grave Strength is what I like to call this deck, because that's the funnest card in the deck, and it kind of describes what's happening. You got a lot of gravy stuff happening. Gravy. That was a fun pun. Alright, I think I'm done talking about this deck. Let's see how I go into games.